Communicators is on location this week in downtown Washington, D.C. at the Government 2.0 Summit, sponsored by O'Reilly Media. And our topic this week is open government and telecommunications policy. Here's our lineup. First up is David Eaves from Vancouver, Canada. He's with the Center for the Study of Democracy, and he'll be talking about how the Canadian government uses technology to create more access to government. After him, Stacey Donahue of the Omidyar Network. She's their investment director, and this foundation invests in technology to increase access to government worldwide. And finally, we'll talk with Hori Okolo. She's known as the Kenyan pundit, and she uses her blog and technology to increase access and awareness of politics in Africa. First up, David Eaves of Canada. What do you do for the city of Vancouver, Canada?
So I advise the mayor and the council, as well as some of the staff, around open government and open data.
And what is open government?
So open government is this idea that we can have better access to decision making, to information, to the kind of the machinery of government, and then when we have that access, citizens have better, are more informed, are better able to influence decisions that affect their community, and can actually self-organize and try to create services and kind of help themselves rather than just relying on government. So to kind of leverage what government's done to also help themselves.
And how does technology help that?
So I think a lot of governments have always strived to be open. I mean, especially in the United States, right from the very beginning, there was this notion that we were going to print everything and share everything. In Canada, I think there's been a strong history of trying to open up government as well. But technology, I think, has really changed how we can do that. That now we live in an era where with digits and ones and zeros, we're able to transmit huge quantities of information to citizens who are interested. The real question is how do we not overwhelm them? How do we get this information in a way that they can search it and they can use it and make it real for them and do whatever they want with it?
In a resolution, you called for Vancouver to think like the web. What did you mean by that?
The goal around think like the web is, if you look at how the internet works, you have this huge conversation that's going on where really anybody can come and participate. And they can leverage the work that other people have done. So if you write if you have a web page and you write a blog, I can comment, or I can take the content you've done, I can comment and build and create my own thoughts, leveraging what you've done. And for those who work in the open source space, if I can actually take your code and I can go and build something that's different, better, that suits my needs. And that's kind of what's made innovation happen on the web. And the question is, how can we take that exciting process and what can we learn from it and then apply it to government? And here I think there's huge opportunities for rethinking how government engages with citizens, how public servants work together, how we deliver services that leverages what the web has done.
How connected is Vancouver?
So I think Vancouver's been it's a very blessed city. We have a huge software kind of industry, a huge video game makers in Vancouver. So we have a strong developer community. A lot of the innovations around video on the internet took place early on in Vancouver. So I would say it's a very connected city. And that means we have a community of people who naturally understand the opportunity of the web and what it could mean for government.
What's the government's support of broadband expansion in Canada?
In Canada, it's a great question because the United States is a big country, but Canada is a bigger but more sparsely populated. So you have to think of the United States but with 1/10 the number of people. And so that means you're going to have huge distances between towns. So you're getting broadband penetration into rural communities is an enormous question in Canada. It's been one of the main issues the governments have to tackle with. I mean, before broadband, it was how do you get phones into rural communities. So this has been a long-standing issue. So the government plays actually a relatively active role in trying to guide the private sector to get broadband into rural communities, and sometimes even takes a very direct role in trying to get broadband into rural communities. They will sometimes have investment requirements of kind of the telco companies.
Requirements.
Yeah. And originally, the telcos were government-owned. Right. And in Canada, each province, I grew up in a country where every province had its own telco, and that was because the government, it was still a utility. It was such an important thing that citizens need to have, and it wasn't clear the private sector could bridge these huge distances, and so government took that role on. But those have since been privatized.
And how much government support, subsidies, how much is spent annually? Do you know on
No,
broadband or on communications policy?
On broadband, I know enough to be dangerous. So I should be careful about how much I go out. And I don't know specific numbers on how much they spend.
We've had an ongoing debate, and it's kind of increased here in this country, on the issue of privacy and online privacy, telecommunications policy. Where's the debate in Canada on that issue?
So Canada, I think, has been a little bit of a leader in this space, and that's in part because we have both at the provincial, which is like our state's level, many of the provinces, but at the federal level as well, we have an office of the privacy commissioner. So this is a government agent who is tasked with thinking nothing but privacy, and not just within government, not just what information does government have about citizens and how do we want to manage that information and make sure that it's used judiciously and it's always kept private, but also they look out at industry and they say, well, what are the industry practices that are going on? What's that mean for privacy? And they're really citizens advocate for issues of privacy. And they have been very, very aggressive, especially dealing with kind of some of the social networks and talking about Facebook. Very concerned and very aggressive and always kind of looking at what are the privacy considerations that we need to be thinking about, advocating for what the interests Canadians have. So I think Canadians are actually very, very well served in this area.
Is Vancouver one big hotspot?
No. There is not a kind of citywide
municipal hotspot
in Vancouver, and actually I don't know of a single city in Canada that has that. There may be one. I don't know about it. I do know that what's been interesting in a city like Montreal and Toronto, there have been efforts to kind of self-organized hotspots, so communities of people coming together and trying to create kind of one big citywide hotspot, sometimes working with government, but sometimes actually just a patchwork of organizations working on their own. And they've had kind of mixed success. There's certain places where you actually do get a good coverage.
In a recent column, David Eaves, you wrote, you quoted John Gilmour, the net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. What does that mean?
So, when you are trying to access something on the internet, and you're trying to block access for me to a site, one of the great things with the internet is because it's decentralized, there are usually multiple routes to get to a piece of information. So if one route's blocked, the internet will try to find other routes around that to get to it. So rather than seeing the block as some kind of this is the be-all, end-all, you're not allowed to see it, it treats it as a bug, as a problem, and tries to see, can we get around this problem? And then I use that quote in a very specific context because I'm interested in access to information in government. And one of the things that I see happening is you look at things like FOI requests, or Freedom of Information requests, or in Canada we call them access to information, so ATIP requests. And you see they take, not just days, but months to actually get the data that you've asked for, the information that you've asked for. And in a world of Google, where people my generation and younger are used to getting information, I think the average Google length, the average length of a Google search is something like 0.3 milliseconds, and that's the time frame they're operating on. So when you have a young Canadian who has to wait months to get access to information from the government, or an American who even has to wait days, they look at the way their government operates and the way that it shares information, and they see it as a bug. They don't see that as an acceptable operating parameter. So I see people talk about, well, we need to reduce the amount of time it takes, and they go, we got to reduce it by days or even by weeks. And I'm like, you have to be thinking radically differently about this problem. You need to completely collapse this timeline. If you want to have a citizenship that is active and engaged, and to broaden the number of people who want to be interested in what the government's doing. Now, there are a lot of people who don't want that, and they're actually quite happy to make us wait, but I think we can do better.
What is the access to the federal government in Canada online?
So in the United States, that's a large question. So I'm going to kind of focus in on what I think people here are most excited about, which is kind of open data. And that's certainly the work that we've been doing in Vancouver. Open data, you have data.gov, data.gov.uk over in the United Kingdom. Here you have governments that are starting to think about how they can share vast quantities of information with citizens. So they're looking at the databases they have internally and saying, how can we share those? So information about crime, information about education, information about healthcare, not just documents, but the raw data itself. So people might be able to do interesting things with it. In Canada, what I see going on is at the municipal level, there's a real interest in this. And I think that's in part because cities are so close to citizens and they have so few resources. They're kind of interested in any opportunity to engage citizens in new ways and to share information with them because the demand is always immediate. It's like right in the politician's face all the time. So they've been kind of at the forefront, and Vancouver's been really leading that charge in Canada. But at the federal level, it's been much, much slower. We don't have anything like data.gov in the United States. And I think something's going to happen on the horizon, but we know we're already 2 years behind. So how much further behind are we going to slip? It's certainly an area of concern for people like me.
So what are you doing, David Eaves, down here in Washington at a Government 2.0 conference?
So I'm doing a couple of things. I wrote a chapter in Tim O'Reilly's recent book, Open Government. I'm very interested in what open government means for how government's going to change. A lot of people are very interested in the citizen side, and I do a lot of work there. But people don't seem to be talking all that much about how the role of the public servant is going to change in a world of kind of e-enabled and Web 2.0 and Gov 2.0 world. The skill sets that make a public servant successful, I think, are going to change. The processes they use are going to change. The way they view their world, the way they view their job is going to change. So I write a bit about that. And I'm also here to just talk about what's going on in Vancouver and some of the exciting things that are taking place.
And that was David Eaves of the Center for the Study of Democracy in Vancouver, Canada. Next up, Stacey Donahue of the Omidyar Network. Stacey Donahue, what is the Omidyar Network?
The Omidyar Network is a philanthropic investment firm that was founded on the principle that every individual has the power to make a difference. It was founded by Pierre Omidyar and his wife Pam, and Pierre was the founder of eBay.
And what is your job?
My job is a director of investments focused on government transparency, which is one of 5 investment areas at the network.
Well, so if you're investing in government openness, what are you investing in?
We invest in both for-profit companies as well as nonprofits that are focused on creating technology platforms that make data available to citizens on government activities in order for citizens to hold government accountable.
An example, please.
Sunlight Foundation is one of our core grantees. They do a number of things, including creating open data applications on government data, as well as advocacy work to promote open government.
Why are you investing in these? These are not necessarily money makers.
That's very true. We're investing because we feel very strongly in the importance of open government and having citizens have access to information in order to promote democracy.
What about the availability of technology and broadband? Is that something else you look at?
Technology is definitely core to what we look at in the government transparency area because it's technology that really amplifies and magnifies the impact that individuals can have in promoting democracy and getting involved in government.
Now, besides the U.S., do you invest other places?
We do. We invest in Africa, East and West Africa, as well as India. We actually just opened an office there.
What are some of the roadblocks or some of the hardships that you're finding in other countries that may not have as much access to technology as we have here in the States?
Well, there are obviously a lot of differences between technology that's available here and in some other countries around the world. So in Africa, for example, mobile penetration far outweighs typical online use, and we're focused on organizations that utilize mobile technologies so that the most people possible can have access to those.
Now, when you invest, and let's take Africa as an example, where does your money go?
Well, we have granted to organizations like Ushahidi, which is an online platform that allows crowdsourcing of crisis mapping situations. It started with the post-election violence in Kenya, but is actually a platform that's now used all over the world, including most recently to map the subway strike in London.
And how do you know if you've been successful in your investments?
That's a great question. We look at reach, engagement, and policy and influence of the organizations we work with. For every organization, it's different, but because we're focused on technology, looking at things like monthly unique users of websites to make sure that the organizations are reaching as many people as possible is an important metric for us. as well as looking at engagement of citizens or even engagement of governments. We work with some organizations that actually work with governments to enhance their transparency. And so we really want the engagement to be both from the demand side, from citizens, as well as from the supply side, from governments.
Do you have unlimited funds?
No, we do not have unlimited funds, but we are very focused on deploying funds to scalable platforms so that even small amounts of money can be invested to have large impact.
Microloans?
We do microfinance in one of our other investment areas called access to capital.
And is that technology based as well?
It is less technology based than the work we do in government transparency, although we are starting to look at mobile platforms for payments and trying to marry the two.
What's been the response of some of the U.S. government and some of the foreign governments to your investments?
I think government throughout the world, in the U.S. and elsewhere, want to promote openness, want to do the best job they can for their citizens, don't always have the tools, or are battling difficulties internally to get those things done. So we look to work with organizations that are not just pushing government, but also working with government so that everyone can work together to get information to the public.
Stacey Donahue, Omidyar Network Investment Director. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, go.
Hori Okolo, we just talked with Stacey Donahue of the Omidyar Network, and she mentioned the group Ushahidi. Ushahidi. What is it?
Ushahidi is an open source platform, technology platform, that allows people to report on events that they're witnessing either via the web, via SMS, via email, via voice, via Twitter, and those events are then visualized on a map. So you can get a sense of what's happening where. It's been used mainly for crisis situations, but also for election monitoring, to monitor problems with the DC Metro, so citizens can send in messages about that. And the word means testimony in Kiswahili.
And why did you co-found this and when?
Ushahidi's birth was actually came out of the post-election violence in Kenya in 2007. And there was a lot of, as the violence broke out, there was a lot of media self-censorship, government intervention in how the media was covering the story, and a lot of the sense of people didn't know what was going on.
Tell us, what happened in Kenya in 2007?
Well, the election was essentially rigged, or there was an issue with the results that were announced and how they were announced and the president being sworn in. And so violence broke out, partly in protest of the election results, but also a lot of underlying issues around land and where people were living, and just sort of a civil, almost a conflict, that broke out, and a lot of people being displaced, a lot of people being killed, both by government forces and by each other, and this was something that took the country by surprise, because elections are very hotly contested, but no one thought a rigging would be possible, especially in this day and age with the technology and everyone watching the results as they were trickling in, and the provisional results and things like that. And so this sort of outburst was very unexpected, and I think a lot of people didn't know how to react to that, including the media. But there was also a concern because we've had clashes after elections before in 92 and 97 that were swept away as minimal clashes, and I think there was also a concern that once the conflict was resolved, the government might try and sort of blow it over and say, now we're back to peace and nothing really happened. And so this idea of why not collect eyewitness reports of what people were seeing and hearing, both to keep track of the story, but also as a record, to come in, so you can go back, and even if the government wants to squash the report, you can. There's a record on the internet somewhere of what happened.
And where were you when you founded Ushahidi?
I was in Nairobi at the time. I live in Johannesburg, but I'd gone back to Nairobi to vote and to cover the story on my blog. I blog a lot about Kenyan politics. And initially I was blogging about the day and the voting day and the transition then to the violence. And then I found myself sort of in a citizen reporter role of covering what was going on and thinking to myself, well, I opened up my blog for comments so people could then report their stories there. And soon I was getting hundreds of comments, like in a couple of hours.
How did people find you? You don't know.
Word of mouth, a lot of people in the diaspora then telling their relatives to get online and to report, or a lot of people in the diaspora also reporting on what they were hearing, a lot of journalists using me to report stories that they couldn't report in the media. But the word just spread that if you're trying to get information about what's going on, come to my blog. And then, so I was thinking, well, if me, one person with no advertising, I'm just in an apartment typing up, could have access to this kind of information, what else could be out there? And if people without internet access could report using text messaging, what else are we missing about what's going on? And that's how a group of us got together, and the idea of Ushahidi was born.
So how is Ushahidi used today?
Well, one of the first critical decisions we took, when we started in Kenya, we didn't even really know what we were doing. We just had this plan. The idea was to get people telling their stories and sort of witnessing. And once we realized there was a lot of interest in it, got a lot of reports, the xenophobic violence broke out in South Africa a few months later, and a group got in touch with us saying, can we use your code to cover this violence going on in South Africa? And the idea is that, first of all, we should open source this so that next time there's a crisis situation, you don't have to build a tool from scratch. And so we used a lot in a lot of elections initially, in India, in Lebanon, in Gabon, in Mozambique, Brazil, Venezuela, in upcoming elections, to sort of for citizens to report on issues in the period leading up to the election and election day itself. We've been used for a number of crisis situations, most notably the earthquake in Haiti and in Chile, most recently the floods in Pakistan. A group of Pakistan techies and civil society members within Pakistan are using it to track where people need help and sharing that information with humanitarian agencies, but also not just for crisis situations or political events, for things like tracking problems with Metro in DC. A group called TBD.com is using us for that. The BBC just used us yesterday to report on the strike in the London Tube. So we've been used all over the world.
How much independent news is there about African politics in your view?
How much independent?
Right. Yeah. Is the media pretty independent?
It depends. It's hard to generalize.
Let's talk about Kenya then.
In Kenya, it's pretty independent. We have, I think, almost 100 radio stations, big and small, vibrant newspapers. There is some self-censorship, maybe because of advertising, who buys your ads, but that's no different from anywhere else in the world. But in Kenya, it's quite vibrant, quite open. Very little government intervention.
Now you grew up in Nairobi. You have a law degree from Harvard.
Yes.
And an undergrad degree in political science from the University of Pittsburgh.
That's correct.
How did you get technology involved?
By accident, I think, really. When I was in law school, there was a Berkman Center for Internet and Society there. And I was essentially a groupie of the Berkman Center. And what they did is study the intersection between law, government, policy, and technology. And at the time, there was a lot in the media about India and outsourcing and Bangalore and how they were booming. And we're thinking, well, why can't we do this in Kenya, and why are we not taking advantage of this new space to develop? But the problem was certain fundamental things, like Skype was illegal in Kenya, and Wi-Fi was illegal in Kenya, and no one could tell me why. I even spent a summer interning with a regulator in Kenya, and beginning to see that it wasn't even this broad conspiracy to shut down the internet. It's just a cake sort of regulation, and you needed to lobby the right people and convince someone that actually there's no threat to national security if Wi-Fi is not legal. The spectrum was allocated to the army 30 years ago, and so you had to have a whole conversation around getting the spectrum back. And so I became fascinated with this intersection of sort of law and policy, and how it had really practical, sort of at that time, negative implications on our ability to be a strong economy. I mean, if your starting point is banning Skype and voice over IP, clearly it's impossible to get a lot of other things right.
Have those policies changed in Kenya?
Yes, dramatically so. Still have a long way to go in terms of just the actual infrastructure, and probably regulation in terms of protecting consumers and encouraging competition. But as far as just things opening up, it's changed dramatically.
And Hori Okolo, what are you doing here at the Government 2.0 Summit in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I'm speaking about the work I've been doing with Ushahidi and with other initiatives around just opening it up and the power of technology to allow citizens to speak and engage. And also just to...
Is Ushahidi still a nonprofit?
It's still a nonprofit.
Okay.
And also it's just a great opportunity to steal ideas. I do that a lot. And just see what the cutting edge is going on as far as the space and open gov, and to meet with a lot of people who I've admired.
Now, why are you living in Johannesburg and not in your hometown of Nairobi?
I met my partner in Johannesburg, so for now we are... I pay my dues.
Hori Okolo is the co-founder of Ushahidi. Thank you for being on the Communicators.
Thank you.
And that wraps up our Communicators for this week here at the Government 2.0 Summit. This Communicators and any of our Communicators from the past, available online at cspan.org. Simply click on the Communicators site and you can watch any when you want. Thanks for being with us.